And over the past few weeks, we've grieved together as the Black community has endured more senseless acts of racial terror and violence. At YouTube, we believe Black lives matter, and we all need to do more to dismantle systemic racism. We're committed to doing better as a platform to center and amplify Black voices and perspectives. And we're working to ensure Black users, artists, and creators can share their stories and be protected from hateful, white supremacist, and bullying content. We know there is much more work for all of us.
And I say there were 2 or 3 years there where the movement went a little bit too far towards Stokely, but in the end, John Lewis prevailed. And I say there were 2 or 3 years there where the movement went a little bit too far towards Stokely, but in the end, John Lewis prevailed.
So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit Black people. No. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit Black people. No. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit Black people. No. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit.
Why would we want more engineering democracy?
Black lives don't matter at all to me. White lives matter. You've had everything. Free fucking everything. Blacks have been coddled for years. Free college. Free everything. Your test scores are higher. Everything. Free college. Free everything. It's still not enough and never will be. Never will be.
So you're saying you're a white supremacist? That's what I'm hearing. Sorry, what's your name?
Black lives don't fucking matter to me.
Can I get your name, please?
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull the knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is.
Good afternoon. This is Rudolf from Germany. I am addressing today specifically Afro-American people. I might be probably the first white man, Aryan German man, who is admitting something to you. I took a long time to think about this video which I'm showing you, a very short one, about the white race. Many of you dark-skinned people, in America mainly, have had a suspicion for a very long time. White people are not really human. And this suspicion has been around for a long, long time. And like any suspicion which is around for a long, long time, there is a little bit of truth to it. I want to admit today to you that white people originating from Northern Europe are called not aliens, they are called Aryans. Sorry about that, my brain don't function so well today. These white people are not really human from this earth like black people are, Indian people are, Asian people are. Yes, they are all humans. We white people are actually a minority, and we are, let's face the truth, also called the tall whites. Not all of us are tall, not all of us are completely white, but in general, that's what it is. And as some of you may know, the tall whites are not really earthly human, but we're coming out of space, out of another galaxy. We are not human as the rest of the human race. We came here from another star, we white people, in order to control the world. We white people all have a secret code, a secret language under each other. We know, no matter how nice we pretend to be, we all stick together in order to control the other races, particularly the black race. And I am feeling so bad about it by now that I had to speak out here on this video and admit it. White people are not human. White people, including myself, all stick together, know the truth, which they do not want to admit to you. White people are out of space. We come from another galaxy. We all know our home planet, which we don't want to reveal because we don't want to be attacked. And we have no good intention with you. We do not want to share our wealth with you. We do not want to share our knowledge with you. You have been mistreated hundreds of years ago, and this is very, very bad. And your chances in life, to the most of you, many of you have no chance in life. You can sit and wait for work on a corner with your other friends, and work will never arrive to you. It's very, very hard, I know. And we rich people, we white people, we alien people don't want to share what we have with you, so you have a good time. This is my testimony in public. White people are from another planet.
Hello and welcome to the most hated show in the black corner of YouTube. I'm your host, the whiteologist, Mr. Blows Your Minds, and this is Black Minds News Report. Black Minds News is the report. Articulate, transmit, communicate, insinuate, develop, investigate, decode, unveil, spread the news, whether by news, video, website, or quotes from publications. As I articulate this information, I ask the creator of the universe to be here, heart, soul, mind, and spirit. Because why? The truth don't need no partner. As a descendant of the greatest people who created this land that you call the United States, we, today's children and present generation, we give honor to our ancestors. You know what the motto of my show is? I'm never gonna tell you what I heard. I'm only gonna tell you what I know. Today's date is August 2nd, 2020. Another return of another episode of Black Minds News Report. Today's show is going to be based on the fact that they say that there's always been a question. They always said there's been a systematic code, and that code is called the Negro problem. Let me say that again. Systematic code called the Negro problem. Seems that the nation is getting heightened up. Too much black talk. Too many things representing the issues and the plight of black Americans in this nation. And some people are getting fed up with it. Enough is enough. Well, Well, Black Minds News, we're going to take some of these stories that I had seen, and we're going to go into a little bit of history into it. And let's just see, really, if Black Lives don't matter. So stay tuned as we get into this broadcast. Hey, how y'all doing, everybody? Again, this is your host, Mr. Blows Your Minds, and welcome to the most hated show in the black corner of YouTube. First and foremost, I want to say what's good to my fam, my subscribers, my day ones, and guess what, y'all? We've been getting a couple new ones, right? So I want to thank those new ones who subscribe to the Black Minds Live family. Find your seat, get in. Attendance is well taken there when you click on. And welcome to the most hated show in the black corner of the internet. Passerbys, if you should happen to pass by, due to the thumbnail, maybe the title of the show, this is the most hated show in the black corner of the internet due to the simple fact that we made a video back on April 1st of 2014. That video did nothing to disclose statistics and what was written in the articles. Wasn't nothing that we were promoting per se, but they did not like it. And we've been in the business since 2012. And as you can see now, we're going on 9 years and we can't get 100 views. We're not in the search engine. And, you know, we just got over 29, 30 subscribers. You know what I'm saying? And yet I had been coming on for days and days in and day out. But as they say, you know, in time, right, everything will reveal itself. We always got a grand opening over here. Go down the aisle. You may happen to see some things that you might like. You happen to see something that make you feel some kind of way. Remember that the motto of my show is the truth don't need no partner. Now, as the intro came in there, as you've seen some things that sets up the foundation of where we're going in this show, we see that former President Bill Clinton, utilizing John, what was John's name again? John Lewis, right? John Lewis. And he was stating, as you heard, about Stokely Carmichael and about John Lewis when they were in their day vying for the position to lead, and that according to Bill Clinton's, as you heard in the video, the clip, that Stokely Carmichael's ideology and persuasiveness was winning. And we would assume that many of those that were in the seat of power did not like, because this was at the time when the FBI was seeking for the Black Messiah to make sure that none would rise. He was a young man who was fervent, steadfast, not going to compromise, believed in an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And that worried a lot of them. Had his, dealings with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm, some of his ideology come from Malcolm X. So it felt like he probably would have been a problem. But as you see that Bill Clinton said, but John prevailed. So a lot of times we think, especially in the season that we're in right now, political season, when people are trying to get people in the mind and spirit to get out here and do votes or to vote. And you believe a lot of times that you're voting for your selection of who you feel represents the things that they campaign on for your, position. Well, as you think you're electing, what he showed you is that they are selected. So sometimes you want something, your eyes is bigger than your stomach, right? Meaning you might want somebody who would be good for you, but it's not good for the system. So John Lewis one is who they prefer to select because he was more like, if you say, a company man. A man that would not rock the boat and be steadfast when he's not getting his proper share, and would raise a stink and a ruckus. Some say safe Negro. And a lot of times we don't understand that. We think that the system actually gives you somebody of a choice that you really think that's going to actually fight for you. And then when you go back and you study the records of the individuals and see the long tenures that they sat in there, you have to ask yourself, what did you gain? I've seen some articles out there that were talking about how the place that the person represented in the squalor and the destitute, but yet somebody sat in the seat of power for a long time. But the thing that he's going to be remembered for is, what he felt might have been the way that he felt of getting things done. Now, I never go and go against my people who are BADOS, because I understand that different generations dealt with situations different because of the time and era in which they dealt with it, and they felt how they had to move. But some generations come after being considered in this country having rights, being beat and laying down. They look back in hindsight, they respect certain, movements and leaders, but they don't want to be known for somebody being a punching bag, as that's going to be your reputation. Your reputation is going to be that. So now they contemplating as whether they want to name the bridge that was so infamous of John Lewis speaking, that how he shed blood on this Edmund Pettus Bridge, and now they want to rename it in honor of him. But to say that Stokely Carmichael is was really saying to we as black folks that when they validate who should lead for you is good for the operation, the forward movement of how this country is to move. And that if you throw a cog in the machine, what end up happening? Halts, stalls the movement of operations. So we have to always ask ourselves, looking in hindsight and looking at history and looking at all the people who had came and represented, and to see their work and see at the end of their tenure and realize that sometimes a lot of it was just what they say, political posturing, right? Political posturing. So once again, somebody sitting in the power, now that they're older, and sometimes certain aspects about how they used to be in control about everything, how they, when words came out of their mouths, a little fox poll, a little something to give us a insight as to how they view when we have strong, people who represents for the people, who become by the people, and is not willing to compromise and waver. These are not people that the system wants to be a part of them. They want to go along, get along. So a lot of times people talk about organizations and how long they've been in operation, and then they show you inklings of things that they say that they have manifest from their established organization. But does that trickle down to we, the lumpen proletariats of the nation? So see that a white woman in a protest, and again, as I said earlier, for those who've been watching a lot of these shows, I've been telling you that, you know, Black Lives Matter is somewhat almost equivalent to saying like the N-word to we. And that just yelling that Black Lives Matter seems to resonate within the soul and heart and spirit of certain people, that you will see that, you know, little demon come up out of them. And it's like anytime that somebody says something about Black lives and the discomfort and the disenfranchised, and they go wild and crazy, and somehow all lives matter and white lives matter. And a woman said some things that are like, well, which history book was you reading, and where did you come to that understanding of saying that black people got everything free? You got everything. You got high test scores. Like, wait a minute, lady. Where are you getting this statistics at? Where are your receipts on this? When everything else failed, everything she said failed, she went into, well, black lives don't matter to her. You're black terrorists. And that she's for the police, regardless to what they're doing to you. And again, runs off. And that's how they deal with it. It's kind of like saying people want certain people to have debates about certain topics. And they don't want their conversation, though. I can say what I want because I'm free, I'm white. What I say is valid, whether it's true or not. But don't test me. Don't debate me to have to prove anything that I say. I said it and that's good enough. And we wonder, how can you move forward? Right? There is no movement forward. Now, from that position, never going to be able to move forward. So with that being said, I seen this young brother here, man. Again, I'm not too much into talking about sports, entertainers, and actors, but I seen this. I was like, damn, man. You're a young man, and this day and age, being 2020, we're just saying hindsight, a lot of us are going to be put on a crossroad and have a choice to make. So a position that's something he had to contemplate in his mind, and when push came to shove, he decided that he wanted to do what he needed to do. Now that we see it, now people have their feelings about it. So just in case you didn't see it, let me show what I'm talking about. We should be right back. Check this out.
So you didn't kneel during the anthem, but you also didn't wear a Black Lives Matter shirt. Do you believe that Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely. I believe that Black Lives Matter. A lot went into my decision, and part of it is, first off, is my thought that, you know, kneeling or wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt don't go hand in hand with supporting Black lives. And so I felt like, just me personally, and what it is that I believe in, standing on the stance that I do believe that Black lives matter, but I just felt like it was a decision that I had to make, and I didn't feel like putting that shirt on and kneeling went hand in hand with supporting Black lives, or that it made me support Black lives or not. I believe that for myself, my life has been supported through the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that everyone is made in the image of God, and that we all fall short of God's glory, and that each and every one of us, each and every day, do things that we shouldn't do. We say things that we shouldn't say. We hate and we dislike people that we shouldn't hate and dislike. And sometimes it gets into a point where we point fingers about whose evil is worse. And sometimes it comes down to simply whose evil is most visible. So I felt like I wanted to just take a stand on it. I feel like we all make mistakes, but I think that
the gospel of Jesus Christ is that there's grace for us, and that Jesus came and died for our sins, and that if we all will come to an understanding of that and understand that God wants to have a relationship with us, that we can get past skin color, we can get past all the things in our world that are messed up, jacked up. I think when you look around, racism isn't the only thing that plagues our society, that plagues our nation, that plagues our world. And I feel like, coming together on that message that we want to get past not only racism, but everything that plagues this other society, I feel like the answer to it is the gospel.
If I'm able to answer that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, am I able to follow up with a quick one?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Okay. So Jonathan, I'm asking this with all sincerity. I just want to really understand your reasoning for that. Can you just explain further what you feel like religion has to do with kneeling for the anthem to protest against racism and police brutality? The correlation between those two?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't really see it as religion for myself. I see it as a relationship with God through His Son who died for our sins. I feel like not only I don't think that kneeling or putting on a T-shirt for me personally is the answer. I feel like for me, Black lives are supported through the gospel. All lives are supported through the gospel. That we all, like I said, have things that we do wrong. And sometimes it gets into a place of pointing fingers about who's wrong is worse, and who's wrong is seen. So I feel like the Bible tells us that we all fall short of glory we all fall short of God's glory, and that at the end of the day, whoever will humble themselves and seek God and repent of their sins, that we could see it in a different light, see our mistakes, see people's mistakes in a different light, see people's evil in a different light. And that would help bring us closer together and get past skin color and get past anything that, that's on the surface and it doesn't really deal with the hearts of men and women.
All right, we are black, right? So we are black. So, see that young brother there coming back on this NBA season. And see Mr. Isaac here, right? Put himself in a situation that, again, a crossroad. Many people feel like, well, if they were under the spotlight, they would handle it and be steadfast. And, it's kind of like what we've seen with Nick Cannon. Say certain things and then you have to go back and we have to renege. That maybe he sat down somewhere and contemplated that this is the route he would take. Right? Kind of like, again, when we're talking about Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis. Right? And so Bill Clinton kind of represents the system, right? And so anytime you have our people who are in these positions, it's kind of like the same thing what Bill Clinton was saying. The Stokely Carmichael was seen to be gaining momentum and, something we were not liking to really have to deal with. But we always are seeking for the John Lewis type, right? And so we see the young man says that he do believe that Black Lives Matter. It matters. Absolutely. He believes in that. Right? But his reasoning for not wanting to, put on the shirt or to kneel, because he believes it's symbolic. Now, some people will agree with that. Some people say, you're right. It's a symbolic gesture. Right? And he believes it doesn't go hand in hand with what really the true meaning of Black lives. Now, many people are going to have different sides of how they view this. Some people are going to be pro for how he took it and dealt with it. I've seen some people out here talking about it. And then there's going to be others going to be like that they believe he's taking, well, I'll talk about that as I get to that, right? And some of the things that he said that, again, that he's using, as he says, he's a Christian, he has Christian faith, which is his foundation, right? And you can hear what that sister that ended up doing the interview to ask him, well, what does that have to do with the position of taking about if you believe in Black Lives Matter? Oh, he goes in and he starts saying things about racism isn't the only thing that reflects our society. Then what else is there in our society? We as BADOS in this nation, Black American descendants of slaves. Well, the issue is there. Well, you gotta understand this, that he himself, I think, have a Puerto Rican background, right? I think he's Puerto Rican. And so, again, those who may hear me and believe that I'm being divisive, no, I am only speaking from the standpoint of a Black American descendant of slave of this nation, and how we don't have the option to choose not to ride. Now, again, we have people who do and are cut from our cloth, and they can have the mindset and ideology to tell themselves other ways to deal with it that is more acceptable for whatever, agenda they might have. But the foundation and hardcore of what is at the foundation of why we are in this condition and who put us in this position is only to be honored by those who are willing to pick up that cross. So we can understand when people who are not, let's say, cut from the cloth of BADOS, but then will umbrella and say that all Black people are the same. But that's what ended up happening. See, when it's not as real to you, when it is not the same plight as yours, then we can see people jumping off and finding other ways so that it doesn't hinder what they're trying to achieve in this land of milk and honey that is for them. And so what we hear is a two-sided, or as they say, we say as Black American descendants of slaves, talking out of the side of your neck. When you're talking out of the side of your neck, trying to convince, I don't know if it's yourself or those who are listening to you, that what you're stating is your position. And we're to respect that. We're not saying that what he's saying is not true. But then he goes in saying that not to seek whose evil is greater. A comparison. If you believe in Black Lives Matter, then you know as a Black person, regardless to the geographical location that might be the descent of where your ancestry come from, what is the plight there? And I think this must be said to make a better understanding. We as Black American descendants of slaves got to realize that everybody does not get to live side by side with their master like we had. Let me say that again. The difference between we as BADOS and some of the other people who are migrating and immigrating into this land from other low geographical locations is that they didn't have the privy of being this close to their master. And so they felt the remote control aspect of master without actually seeing him, other than being in places that they didn't even have the economics, or were places where they worked there and seen serving and all the other aspects of that. But we're talking about possibly going to school, working with, socializing with. That's something entirely different. And so when somebody gets the opportunity to make some kind of money, and then they're put in a situation that would, again, compromise your position, because, see, somebody said, well, why would you throw all that away when really that fight isn't about you. Now this here, to me, is in the secret compartments of a lot of people's minds. They're never going to say this openly. They're never going to say that. But this is what they're thinking. So if they never get a chance to be confronted with it, you'll never actually know. But in this case, you got to see a young man who, again, I'm not trying to say that he's not a man of faith, a man that's believing in what he's saying, but the position that he's taking, let's just say, if you believe in Black Lives Matter, and then let's say, I don't know, the old saying is, if everybody's doing it, don't mean you're supposed to do it because everybody else is doing it. But this wasn't new talk. And again, he's a man. He's going to make his own decision. He's going to live whatever the consequences that come with it. And again, so be it. But, you know, based on today's show, again, the systemic code is called the Negro problem. Systemic code called the Negro problem. There's a systemic code going on in this land and other lands. And that code is called, there's always been a Negro problem in this land due to the simple fact that those who had become the chattel that went through the process and to come out of that and try to become reformed citizens, and what this country did to still make a buffer zone to keep them out. And as we do this show, I'm going to get more in depth about that to show you the trueness of what I'm talking about, and not just talking about it, and show you it, that you can have a young brother like this who say the things he's saying because he's trying to protect himself. He doesn't have the fight, even though he does have the fight, but he does see himself different. You understand what I'm saying? He don't see himself quite like those who, let's say, if Black Lives Matter is about Black Americans and what's going on here, some people like to believe that they would like to be put into the furnace, right? That they will be able to get in the furnace and they take the excruciating heat and suffering and pain that comes with being in that furnace. But once they get close and start feeling the heat of that, they start, had to contemplate and let me find another reason not to really deal with it. So as we heard him in this conversation, he says racism is not the only thing that reflects in our society. What other, as he says, the only thing that reflects in our society? Racism. What other game in town in this nation other than racism that is the prohibiting obstacle that prohibits we as BADOS? Now again, those who come here under visas, lotteries, what they call that, things when your parents and all, right? That's something entirely different. That has nothing to do with we as BADOS. But the long history that we have endured in this country, we don't have the luxury to be able to jump off. What we do is we sell out, but we don't jump off. And it's not until those who do that and those tools that they become, and when that tool becomes no more, they discard it, then you seeing them trying to get themselves back in. So when you don't want to become a tool, these are the things and the conversations that you will have when you get confronted on an open forum, right? So he believes religion to kneeling. He says it's not really about religion to him. It was about his relationship with God. Okay. Like Family Feud, good answer. Good answer, right? Okay, we're going to go with that. You can't go wrong when you're talking about your relationship with the Creator. You're never going to go wrong with that. And we as Black people are never going to sit here and say, you know what? Even though in the back of your mind, well, okay, you said that, right? But then he says something to the fact that he said that all lies support the gospel. See? So we kind of see that in your conversation, what you're saying you are trying to appease to the, let's say, those who are writing the checks, those who have, picked you up. And will you be a John Lewis type for like Bill Clinton putting the finger up and say, but he won, right? For all them who did what they did as into the shirt and kneeling, you was one that you was against it, and you were a person of color, you can be a John Lewis for them. So you may gain something in your profession because of your stance. Who do you care whether if the people here don't like you because you here because I'm not cut from you anyway? So he says we all have to humble, right? We all have to be humble. Now, how much humbling you think that we as BADLs have to do? BADLs done humbled so much to the fact that we allow everybody, even those who don't come here, the money that is garnered and taken and sent back, we sacrifice for everybody that comes here. But do people give us the honor and respect for that? Or in the confines, in the corners of the conversations that they have, we're stupid and we're this and we're that. But we're the greatest sacrifice in this land. We sacrifice more to the fact that it becomes internal, that we start to lash out at each other. Okay? So I like to think of this. I'm going to say this. This is what the conversation must have been like before he did what he did and had that conversation that you heard. Check this out. Listen to this.
Dayla, my man, I'm glad you got your mind right.
Well, it's right, tight, and ready to delight.
Okay, I'm with this.
Mr. Dunwoody, please sit back and allow me to paint a picture.
Okay, I'm all ears and my nose is a close second.
Now, I have been doing a lot of soul searching.
Okay.
And once again, you're right. My previous work has been all surface, superficial.
It's a thing of the past.
Yes, I've never really dug deep into my pain as a Negro.
Hey, look, those things, they're hard to look at sometimes.
Yes. And as Mark Twain so fully understood, satire is the way if we are ever to live side by side in peace and harmony.
Right.
So, my show that I'm pitching is about promoting racial healing.
Healing is great. I like this. Give me more. Go on.
Yes.
Go on.
Now, I know you are familiar with minstrel shows.
Yes.
They came about in the 1840s.
Yes.
It was a variety show in which the talent was singing, dancing, telling jokes, doing skits, like in Living Color.
Right. That was dope.
Now, Mr. Dunwoody, I ask you, when was the last time there was a great variety show on the air? Carol Burnett?
Carol was bug.
Hee-haw?
Hee-haw was...
Keenan and Cal.
Yo, that's the stupidest shit on TV, yo.
So I say, let's take this form, this very American tradition of entertainment into the 21st century, the new millennium.
Okay, no. What's the name of the show? We need something that we could sell.
Man-Tan, the new millennium minstrel show.
Man-Tan, the new millennium. I really like this. You know how I know? I'm getting a boner. Huh? Swanson Johnson is getting hard. You know what I'm saying? I like this. I'm feeling this shit. I like this. No. Give me more.
It's going to take a lot of courage and backbone on the part of CNS to get this thing on the air.
You don't worry about that. That's my job. You just be the creative genius that you're proving that you are. Okay, now, who we're going to get to star in the show? Because
you kneel during the anthem, but you also didn't wear a Black Lives Matter shirt. Do you believe that Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely. I believe that Black Lives Matter. A lot went into my decision, and part of it is, first off, is my thought that, kneeling or wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt don't go hand in hand with supporting Black lives. And so I felt like, just me personally, what it is that I believe in, standing on the stance that I do believe that Black Lives Matter, but I just felt like it was a decision that I had to make, and I didn't feel like putting that shirt on, kneeling, went hand in hand with supporting Black Lives, that it made me support Black Lives Matter. I believe that for myself, my life has been supported through the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that everyone is made in the image of God, and that we all fall short of God's glory, and that each and every one of us, each and every day, do things that we shouldn't do, we say things that we shouldn't say, we hate and dislike people that we shouldn't hate and dislike, and sometimes it gets into a point where we point fingers about whose evil is worse, and sometimes it comes down to simply whose evil is most visible. So I felt like I wanted to just take a stand on it. I feel like we all make mistakes, but I think the gospel of Jesus Christ is that there's grace for us, and that Jesus came and died for our sins, and that if we all will come to an understanding of that and understand that God wants to have a relationship with us, that we can get past skin color, we can get past all the things in our world that are messed up, jacked up. I think when you look around, racism isn't the only thing that plagues our society, that plagues our nation, that plagues our world. And I feel like, coming together on that message that we want to get past not only racism, but everything that plagues this other society, I feel like the answer to it is the gospel.
If I may answer that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, am I able to follow up with a quick one?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Okay. So Jonathan, I'm asking this with all sincerity. I just want to really understand your reasoning for that. Can you just explain further what you feel like religion has to do with kneeling for the anthem to protest against racism and police brutality? The correlation between those two?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't really see it as religion for myself. I see it as a relationship with God. Through His Son who died for our sins. I feel like I don't think that kneeling or putting on a T-shirt for me personally is the answer. I feel like for me, Black lives are supported through the gospel. All lives are supported through the gospel. That we all, like I said, have things that we do wrong, and sometimes it gets into a place of pointing fingers about who's wrong is worse, and who's wrong is sin. So I feel like the Bible tells us that we all fall short of glory, we all fall short of God's glory, and that at the end of the day, whoever will humble themselves and seek God and repent of their sins, that we could see it in a different light, see our mistakes, see people's mistakes in a different light, see people's evil in a different light, and that it would help bring us closer together and get past skin color, get past anything that that's on the surface. It doesn't really deal with the hearts of men.
With the Philadelphia Sixers, David, when they were going through all their growing pains, he got a lot of opportunity to play.
He did. Isaac grabs his left knee. In a lot of pain. Jonathan Isaac coming off a left knee injury suffered on January the 1st at Washington. And he is in a lot of pain. Let's get a quick look. Stepping through the middle. And you see that left knee, that leg kind of buckle a little bit, even though it's
in 1963 said, "We are tired about being beat by police. We're tired of being put in jail. We want our freedom now." Mr. Attorney General, in your remarks, you indicated that we've made great progress since that time, and you indicated that the killing of George Floyd was shocking. I disagree. It was outright cold-blooded murder on the streets of America, unfortunately by police misconduct. You seem to have a difficult time understanding systemic racism and institutional racism that has plagued so many. Mr. Attorney General, do you understand a black mother's or parent's talk to their child, to their son? Do you know what that is?
I think I do.
I don't know if you do, but Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Sean Bell, and George Floyd. Black mothers and fathers have had to talk to their sons about police violence. I take no backseat to the history of this committee that has stood for good policing, not misconduct. And so I ask you this question: does the Trump Justice Department seek to end systemic racism and racism in law enforcement? I just need a yes or no answer.
To the extent there is racism in any of our institutions in this country and the police, then obviously this administration will fully enforce this.
So you agree that there may be systemic racism?
To the extent, in where?
Let me continue my line of questioning.
I don't agree that there's systemic racism in the police department.
Specifically,
generally in this country.
I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. General. Specifically, do you understand the violent impact of racial profiling? And do you support the end racial profiling, racial and religious profiling in the George Floyd bill, including the removal of the strict interpretation of qualified immunity, which would leave individuals like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd without any relief at all?
No, I'm opposed to eliminating qualified immunity, and I don't agree that it would leave the victims of police misconduct.
Well, let me share with you some aspects.
Without any remedy at all.
I'm reclaiming my time. Let me share with you some aspects of profiling. After the death of George Floyd found that while black people make up 19% of the Minneapolis population and 9% of its police, they were on the receiving end of 58% of the city's police use of force incidents. In addition, we've seen that black men are twice as likely to be stopped and searched, Hispanic drivers 65% to receive a ticket, and Native Americans in Arizona 3 times more likely to search and be stopped. Let me ask you the questions of how we respond to that. The Justice Department has many tools at its disposal to reduce police violence, the pattern or practice investigations, a practice to end bad policing and police violence. It addresses police violence at an institution level rather than just focuses on acute cases. If you understand that, then why has your department only pursued one pattern or practice investigation since President Trump took office that could stop systemic racism?
If you read my statement or listened to my statement, I did specifically acknowledge that there was a difficulty in this country with the African American community.
Mr. Attorney General, I have short time. Can you just tell me why you have not done a pattern in practice? What was the reason?
And you asked me what I thought the response was, and I thought the response to this is, in fact, training of police. I think the police believe that that's a response. I was talking to a black
then let me
chief
continue.
of police.
Mr. Attorney General, I want to respect you, but I have a short time. For example, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which makes unlawful the denial of rights under the color of law. Can you defend the fact that in the first 7 months of FY 2020, federal prosecutors filed only 242 charges in just 27 cases in the Trump DOJ? And were you aware that in FY 2019, federal prosecutors brought 2 Section 242 charges in just 49 cases in the United States? And are you aware of how many cases we've had? 184,274, which means that in FY 2019, only about 27 out of every 100,000 prosecutions was related to Section 242 charges. Do you have a reason for that?
Yes, I do. I will get you the numbers on it. I don't know them off the top of my head, but actually our criminal prosecutions under 241 and 242 are extremely strong and are comparable to, if not exceed, prior administrations. But at the beginning of this year, most of very few jurisdictions had grand juries that were open. No grand jury.
I think the reason is because it was really skinny. It was not your focus. Your focus was more to let out friends like Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, while Tamir Rice, whose case has not been taken up, was playing with a toy gun, was killed by police at the age of 12. Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her apartment when she was killed by police at age 26. And Rashad Brooks, 27, was killed just for sleeping in his car in a Wendy's parking lot. And George Floyd from Houston, Texas, known as a humble man, was murdered in the streets of Minneapolis crying, "I can't breathe." I would hope that the DOJ would focus on systemic institutional racism because there is good policing. That's what we're trying to do in the Judiciary Committee, and that's what we need you to join us on, Mr. Attorney General, and to recognize that institutional racism does exist, and until we accept that, we will not finish our job and reach the goals and aspirations of our late iconic John Lewis. With that, I yield back.
All right, we black, right? So that was the hearing with the Attorney General. And you seen the interviewer being Sheila Jackson Lee. And or Sheila Lee Jackson, right? And you heard us say off the bat, tired from being beat by police. We tired. I like John Lewis. We tired of being beat by the police, right? Right? You're going to go to the bully and tell them, we're tired of being beat by you, right? Would you please stop beating us? Would you please do that? That's what we asking. We asking you, would you please not beat us anymore, right? They said, well, the person that you're using as your iconic figure, that was how his claim to fame was. He got a problem with it. He didn't have a problem with it, right? So again, not making fun of a man who just died. But what we're looking at is, again, the show is based on the systemic code called the Negro problem. And in this code, it seems that the problem becomes for Negroes, if you don't want us to continue to do the status quo, the same old, right? Allow us to manifest whatever our destiny is we have for you. Anything to deter it, well, you're putting a halt in the progress of our machine. And so it seems that any time when they have these discussions or have somebody who can actually speak on these situations, there's a pattern here that I want y'all to pick up on. And I'll talk about it as we go on more in the show. As the young man that was before, again, that was Jonathan Isaac, right? And who believed in Black Lives Matter, but he didn't believe about kneeling or putting on shirts to be symbolic. But he never made reference to what would suit his taste, that he would be more, prone to participate in. He never stated that. And so here's a hearing that he should have heard, that they were talking about systemic racism in the system. Here's a young man, Jonathan Isaac, who believed that that racism isn't, as he said, right, the only, problem in society or across the world. But he never disclosed what are some of the other issues other than racism. Yet they're having a hearing about systemic racism. So you can't have both. Somebody wrong, right? Or it is what we think you were trying to do. So Sheila Lee asked, she quoted, it was said that you said it was shocking, the killing of George Floyd. Shocking. The only thing was shocking was the fact that the blatant disregard, that being caught red-handed with a camera filming you, that you would change your position and not do it, but to pursue further and go through it. Shocking, again, as she said, no, it wasn't shocking. It was just cold-blooded murder. Now, again, the young man, we don't expect him to take on this and be the mouthpiece. Again, I'm not sure whether he grew up on the streets here in the United States and gone through. And even though, with that being said, those who have, again, an option in your background as to you can be black when it's beneficial and jump off of being black because it's really not your cut of the cloth, that's an option to your discretion. And so those who are cut from the cloth can never be truly upset with you. We understand. But it just seems that people who can come from somewhere else, you can tell us fantastic stories about back in the land that you come from or your family and descents from, and tell us all these magnificent stories. As I seen recently before I was doing this show, and matter of fact, I think I read it last night, where in Jamaica, they made a law now banning that you can't have dreads. Imagine that, a Jamaica with no dreadlocks, right? How Rasta gonna be a Rasta if you can't have dreadlocks? Well, you know why that is the way it is? And not just in Jamaica, but we're just gonna say most geographical locations where African descent people have migrated from your lands that your descent and ancestries have been and come into the so-called land of milk and honey, then who are back there fighting in behalf of the land if the choicest ones, the ones who got, those who are willing to, education, skills, if you all are leaving up out of your countries of where you migrate from, then who's doing the fighting? So you leave yourself susceptible, or your countrymen susceptible to other people to invade, and then not having all the best of the people are being compromised in ways that then when you turn around and look and you say, damn, no dreadlocks in Jamaica? Right? No dreadlocks. What the hell going on here? It's because why? You're all here now. But then you still kind of separate yourself from those who are in this land, what you are in those other lands. So what people do is kind of like, how somebody can move from one state and go to a new state and go to a new school. They get a whole new identity. No one knows their background. They get to start all over fresh, even if they was, some kind of other person they was prior to there, that now all of a sudden now, guess what? They somebody new. But now you have to assimilate to the dominant of the culture. And that dominant of that culture that you have to assimilate in is the downtrodden ones that everybody seems to have an understanding that these are the slaves that was of this land. And so what many do is they try to propel themselves above, and I'm not saying all, but some. And what ends up happening is you lose sight. You get caught up trying to accumulate this wealth and this fame and all this. And while you left your back door open in your country, now the Chinese in there running stipulated legislations and now tampering with the culture. Well, so when you don't take a stance nowhere, you don't take a stance nowhere. And now what you happen is you're going to eventually be forced in a situation that even though you feel like you think you can jump off, you're not going to be able to jump off. So again, it's talking about shocking, and that can he answer with a yes or no about institutional racism? Can he answer that a yes or no? You know he couldn't do that, right? It's kind of like you got a person who's running for vice president, Kamala Harris. You seen in the beginning there where that was quote what she said. You think I'm going to just say everything for black people? No. Became a joke out here, right? But she got exposed because you can't claim to be BADOS and then you're not willing to, go all out. That's what we expect. You cut like we cut. You come from where we come from. But what end up happening is once that spotlight gets on them and that microscope and those words that you got to say, you end up trying to tightrope, and we say we're not playing because, a lot of our foundation teaching come from because of what we were in this land is the Bible, and that Bible done told you that you can't play both sides of the fence. You're either going to love one and hate the other, or hate the other and love the other one. So you have to choose. So, no, okay, no, you're not going, right? So that's what ended up happening here. See, just like the person who was sitting here having this conversation, they're not BADOS either. So it looks good for a person having that type of conversation. It looks good as a political posturing, but answering yes and no, are you going to work with us? It's still not going to get anything damn done, right? And we're going to say that if self-preservation is about for your people, and I know everybody like to umbrella say we all the same, but people group according to the same kind. Because let's just say, for instance, when we talk about immigration, when people come here from other lands, don't they automatically go in the grouping of the area where the people who are from the same place they come from, or do they just throw them any damn way? You get what I'm saying? So they say birds of the feather flock together. So if you are having political aspirations and trying to obtain something, where did you get, voted in, and who was the constituents that got you in? Were they more like the people like yourself? Then that fight that you're talking about ain't really about you. It's about other people. But it looks good on TV. It looks good on the transcript. It looks good in the articles. But ain't nothing really going to get done that way. So we have to be mindful of all the people who they keep putting in front of us and talking, and then we see them not holding. It's just a telltale sign, if you ask me. So she asked him a question about systemic racism, and do he believe to the extent that the systemic racism is in the entire system? Even in the police department. He kind of said, yeah. He thought about it for a second, like, wait a minute, hold on. Everything, yes, is in there, but, except for under the police department. How is that possible? It's everywhere, but it's not in there. When that, in the history of those who've been over here and did the show, you know that we done talked about how that was in the history before, where it evolved. It was the evolution to where you got the police department. And look at the duties that they had back then. Ain't too much difference of now. And so talked about the old quantified immunity, right? He opposed that they're trying to take it away, and he doesn't believe that it would harm any way that somebody who was trying to get the civil money for the loss, he don't believe that will hurt. If you keep it, that doesn't hurt that. But we want to keep that qualified immunity, though. That becomes the question, y'all. That quantified immunity, why is that really there? Why is it that they keep these type of laws on there, knowing that this is where, people who's probably upholding, but some odd reason have this in there as a way as a kickstand to get out? We're going to get to that after this, but let me show y'all this here. Moving on. So that was what that was there, right? That was just that conversation there. And again, more of a political posturing for me. Ain't nothing going to get done doing that and talking about, the icon of John Lewis. Nothing legislative being passed, right? We're just saying some words to try to see somebody if we can get them to trip up, and so they can have us talking about it. But as to get anything done legislatively, no. And the reason why that is, you got to stay tuned, because I'm going to show you something that I believe this is the crux of why nothing gets done. So let me show you this, and we should be right back. Check this out.
CBS News has confirmed that after being shot 5 times, Breonna Taylor was alive, but struggling to breathe. In a revised lawsuit filed on behalf of Taylor's family, attorneys allege that Taylor was left to die. They say that she was not killed immediately, that she lived for another 5 to 6 minutes before succumbing to her injuries on the floor of her home.
Turn around, face away!
Cell phone video released last week shows officers moments after the shooting with their guns drawn, arresting Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who later told investigators that he thought the cops were intruders.
The door, comes like off the hinges. So I just let off one shot. Like I still can't see who it is or anything.
One of the officers involved, John Mattingly, described how he fired back.
And so I just returned fire. I got 4 rounds off. And it was like simultaneous. It's boom, 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 boom.
So in the pre-operational briefing, you guys just considered this location as, and I've heard this a couple times throughout this investigation, as a soft target.
Right.
Based on the information that the lead had concerning the entire investigation.
Correct.
The organization of the, drug trafficking ring. So that's what made the, that's what kind of made you all come up with the original, hey, we're just going to knock, try to get her to the door, the most passive way to serve the warrant.
Right.
Going back to, you guys, your whole intentions were to have the occupant or occupants come to the door. And you characterized, your all's knocking, announcing. Initially, it's just knocking, trying to get somebody to the door, which kind of, initiates the upstairs resident to come out and make contact with you guys.
Right.
And do you remember kind of what kind of verbal exchange
between the upstairs? I remember when he first popped out, Lieutenant Hoover kind of came to I don't know if it was a low ready or kind of a up, because they didn't know who was approaching them. And I remember Brett extending his gun saying, get back in your apartment, get back in your apartment. Brett was a little bit worked up. And I remember at one point, because they kept exchanging, while we're doing this, I remember looking at Brett saying, Brett, relax. Brett, just relax. Because, while you got to pay attention to him, that's not your focus.
So I'm just start walking backwards, and they're like, there's something that was blocking me or whatever. They was telling me to move it out of the way. And like the dog is barking, and that's when I got close to the edge, and the dude was like, are you hit with any did you get hit by any bullets? And I'm like, no. He said, oh, that's unfortunate. And then that's when they had the dog right there. I don't have on any shoes. I clearly have nothing in my hands, anything. I'm walking backwards, and he has this dog right here barking like 3 feet behind me, like the dog is going crazy. And he's like, if you don't if you don't get down or something on your knee, I'm doing everything they're asking me to, slowly and surely. Like, I'm like scared to death, and I told him like I'm scared, like. And he was like, if you don't get down on your knees, I'm going to let the dog go. I'm going to let the dog go. And I'm just like, please don't let the dog go. Like, so now I finally get down, and then they come and they put the cuffs on me and stuff, and then they're walking me away. And that was it. That was the end of everything.
The March 13th raid remains under investigation by the FBI and the Kentucky State Attorney General. Police targeted the home erroneously, believing that it was being used by a drug dealer to receive packages. Taylor's death has been a rallying cry for protest across Louisville and the country. Demonstrators have called for criminal charges against the officers involved. Jeff Begay, CBS News.
A white man to try to tell black people what we are doing, where we need to go, what our issues are.
That is part of the gated institutional narrative. Tamika, I should be a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement because I'm more capable than you. I'm more capable.
Really? All right.
Yes, I am.
You know what? Here's what
you don't understand the nature of reality. Tamika, do you understand cooperative and competitive game theory? Tamika, do you understand? Please answer this. Tamika, do you understand the difference between competitive and cooperative game theory? Do you understand the difference? Do you understand what's needed for us to cooperate with each other and to increase the value of the group for all human beings? We have to be transparent. We have to be interdependent. Interconnectivity.
Here's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so
the separatist ideology is the problem.
Here's what I'm gonna do. Here's what I'm gonna do.
The fear-based pandering is part of the problem, Tamika. It's
so extremely racist.
Problem, Tamika. It's time that all humans unify. Tamika, me and you are the exact same thing.
We need to get crack dealers off the street.
Of course, and meth dealers.
There's a problem with drugs. So what is that? That's
and meth dealers. And meth dealers, all hard drugs, heroin, everything.
Here's what we're gonna do, Mr.
All negative externalities must be eliminated.
The people that you do business with, to make a decision about whether or not what you're saying and the propaganda and the lies that you're spreading is something that they should continue to support. So what I promise you is that you will have to deal with me for the rest of your life, because anybody you do business with, I'm going to show up to make sure that they know that you are a racist and that your rhetoric and the tone that you're using is extremely dangerous, and that you disrespected the life of a young 26-year-old woman.
Never. I will not accept that. And it shows your colors. You don't give a about decreasing the problem, Tamika. It's time that all.
All right, we black, right? So, I gave you a little rendition there. Start off giving those who might have not heard about the Breonna Taylor situation and what took place. That was kind of like the news flash that took place of that particular time. And, still to this day, being August 2nd, 2020, no one has been apprehended. No one has been gone through the process. No one's been, it just seems to be that she's got shot. Everybody has gone about their long head and she's dead. And that's just the end of it, right? And so it looks like on the other day, July 31st, I think this originally broke, that a producer, J.W. Lucas, slammed after saying Breonna Taylor signed up for that life, right? So he went on Twitter and said some things that kind of rocked the boat. And again, as is being stated, he being a white man, and somehow, because he's a music producer, he has such acts like the Baby and the Little Uzi Vert, right? And so what he exactly said, I think I can show you what he got on there. Let me see if we got that or not. We got that? Put that up there. And let's see, go ahead and put that up there, right? No, not that one. Not that one. Put the post up there. There you go, put the post. Should be the post, right? I don't know why the post ain't showing, right? Should be the post, right? Right, why the post ain't showing? Right up there, it'll show, go up there. There you go. All right, so what you see on your screen there says, why is the world asking for justice for hashtag Breonna Taylor? Of course, she shouldn't have lost her life, but do you realize that she was involved with multiple drug dealers who were using her house as a trap spot? If you sign up for that life, there are consequences, the producer wrote in a now deleted tweet, right? So, again, many people will look at this and find a lot of fault in the things you're stating, especially when a person who, again, even what you're stating, she shouldn't have lost her life, okay? Now, only the unilateral side that we've heard, which is just the side of just the police, we heard the boyfriend, as you heard in the clip that I just played there, he was telling you what happened that night, as if like, even though he was surrendering, no weapons in his hand, that he felt like that the officer was trying to find a way to unleash the dog on him and then create a situation that maybe that would end up terminating his life because of what they had already done. They were looking for an out, right? They were looking for an out. And so he says something that is very insensitive for the fact that many of us, BADOS, and we done, again, when you had the, back to backs, she was one that got caught in between, that got buried because of the Ahmaud Arbery story, and then you had hers, and then you had George Floyd. So she got kind of, lost in there. And with that being said, everything is now coming back in full circles about what done happened with her, even though you had the Not Fucking Around coalition. They went out there trying to get some things done. Again, there's a lot of speculation when it comes to that, but they did go out there to show some solidarity as into trying to bring some justice or bring some light to the situation. And then you post something like this. And so as an open wound, putting salt in it, people are going to respond that it hurts. And then make the accusations that you can't really substantiate when you talk about she was involved with multiple drug dealers. Now, again, where do you get the confirmation of the stories that you're speaking? Is that just because that could be the propaganda that is being spent by the, opposing administration, trying to find an out, a way to, clarify their position, saying that her house was a trap spot? There's a lot of speculation because, again, how did they get the warrant to get to the house as a no-knock? What about what was said and what was told to the judge? According to, I remember when I looked at the story, they was talking about how they watched until the lights went out. When did they see the young man? Was the young man there the whole time? Did they see the young man come? Did they see them come together? Did they know he was there? Right, there's a lot of stuff that was there. And then you heard the conversation in the interview when he was talking about how he unloaded 4 shots. Boom, 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 boom. But you heard Kenneth say he only shot 1 as a firing one because he said they bust in through the door. Right? So just imagine that. Okay, y'all coming. It's already 10 o'clock or late. I'm not sure what time it was exactly. I don't have the article and stuff in front of me. But y'all came there was after night because they were already in the bed and she had no clothes on. So we could speculate to what was going on in that. And then here y'all coming in, and you also heard in that interview, you heard them say that this was a soft target. Meaning they didn't feel no threat about them coming there. So what was all this big, kicking the door, waving the fofo, all you heard, huh? What was all that about? If you felt like you could have knocked at the door, the person would have came and you could have, shown your warrant and so forth and so on. Why had it go in there, coming gun blazing in the whole 9? So it was recklessness in a lot of sense. So again, here's you coming out, J.W. Lucas, saying things that just doesn't make sense because no one's been to court. You haven't heard the other side. What evidence has been shown? Everything is just one-sided. And to say, why is the world asking for justice? I don't know if it's the world, but I do know it might be the nation based on, again, the pantheon of people who have lost their life senselessly under the police custody. And so you as a white person feel like somehow you entitled to talk about, then you talked about Tamika Mallory and telling her that she's unqualified to be in a position and you more qualified because you come from the gated community, because you deal with those in hip hop. What does that got to do with we as BADOS? That's nothing but somebody going to work. That's somebody who is being paid to do a job that you need rendered, right? Producing things that might be also be detrimental to their own people, right? And here you feel like this because you feel like he using some term cooperative, comparative ventures, all this about money shit. And talking about, see, I think this might be the new little punchline or the new little slogan they're using, that we all the same. We all the same now. There's no difference. And this is about making money and we're going to just get, no. That ain't how it goes. You understand? You ain't just be beating some, okay, those who done seen Popeye, right? You can't just beat down Popeye Bluto. And they thinking Popeye ain't gonna get to his spinach and do what he gotta do because he Popeye the Sailor Man, right? As you done did all you do, he can't just sit there and be like, all right, it's okay, we good. I got all of them, we good. No. I gotta get you for what you done did to me. Now the problem is a lot of them will say, well, I had nothing to do with it. But you are the inheritor of what your ancestors left you. And that's the problem what they don't want to accept. They left you to clean up the mess. And if you don't clean the mess up, then guess what? You're going to be the inheritor of what comes with that. See, everybody like the privilege. They like to have all the assets and inheritance, but they don't want the responsibility that comes with the karma that comes with it. And so he has the mitigated goal, talking about increasing the value of the group. Y'all not trying to increase it. No. Man, wait a minute. You a white dude using black people's, black American descendant of slaves, which would be considered our culture. Why white folks ain't got no culture, nothing that they making that they could sell across that go around the world? Why come y'all ain't got nothing? Right? But you utilize us and our talent to get more of the money. And you can't really use, obviously a lot of times that they matriculate down into where we at is because they can't find a lane in amongst their own people. So they feel like if they come down there and they got this white man, no best complex of most of our people, that they somehow become a boss automatically being around us. And a lot of them go with that. Just because he might be talking, your slang, right? The ebonics, as they say, that y'all give them a pass. We didn't give them a pass in my day. You didn't get no pass. You be the white boy that who you is. Because I think you mimicking me when you start doing that. That ain't where you at. That ain't where you from. But somehow y'all trying to make this culture like this is something that go across all lines. And that's why people can get away with certain shit that they do, is because they can say things that you think that is just part of the vernacular of conversation, but they getting some off. But when you make that differentiate and saying, hey, no, you can't say that, you can't do that, be who you is. Talk how y'all talk. Be who you is. And so they think, some of them, again, as I said all the time about barbershop, when y'all allow that white boy to go in there and tell him, say, I'm black, he said, I'm blacker than you on your best day, and you can never be white like me on none of your best days. That means he went on both sides of the game. Come in, got the big truck, got the sister with the, you understand? And y'all let him say they get that off. So what does that do? That plant that seed in their mind, and they think, well, shit, we don't want to pay all the money for the concerts. We listen to all that. So, shit, if all it got to be to be black is just to, act like, walk like, and put on the costume like this shit, I could be one too. No, that ain't what it is. And see, we allow people to do that. At least y'all have allowed them to do that. We didn't allow them to do that. You had to be a white boy to be a white boy. Right? Now, there's some difference on some that move around. Even those that might have even lived around you, they weren't full-blooded like that. Come on, Tamika. Right? Wait a minute. What are you talking about? Right? So they just believe because they're around certain people and they, give them some kind of pass. And that's why they talk to you the way they talk to you, right? Right? And talking about her separatist ideology is the problem. Because you want to separate from them. You don't want to be with them. You want to be self-sufficient and on your own. See, if I get rid of you and then I get the entirety of all my talent and my worth, then guess what happens? I'm allowed to build my community up with all the economics that I have garnered. But as long as you taking 80, 90 and giving me 5 and 10%, you know what I'm saying? That's why it's a slow progress amongst us, right? So this separatist ideology, talking about this field-based pandering. What do you mean by field-based? That field nigga shit? Is that what he's trying to say? Field-based pandering? Right? See, that's what I'm saying. They want to write the story, tell you the story, and be you at the same damn time. Is that shit a sickness? Is it a sickness? It's a sickness. But they're not trying to act like they sick like that, right? They're not trying to say that. So you see that Tamika, the way she got in, she had posted back in a comment towards that, and she had said, "Stop justifying the murder of a black woman. You have no facts, just gossip. A detective lied to obtain a no-knock warrant. Post office denied suspicion package were ever sent." Right? Because they talked about a post office that was sending supposedly packages that supposed to have been drugs, but the post office denied that there was ever any suspicious packages. But yet, that's what you were saying by saying that our crib was a dope spot, right? And she said, Breonna will get justice, and you'll be still a racist with black friends that need to mind his business, right? See? She checking him. This our business. Why do people feel like they can just come in and tell us? See, that's that old slave master mentality. I own you. Like he told her, as you heard, he knows more. He should be the leader of the Black Lives Matter organization because he know more. He know cooperative, comparative ventures. And well, what good is that shit if you ain't got us in it? You get what I'm saying? Your business ain't no good without us. So we saying we don't need you, you need us, right? And so he went and responded back to her. He said he said there has to be consequences for people selling crack or any hard drugs to our community. What do you mean our community? See how you see how some people again, just because you are a producer dealing with hip hop and you around there and get to smoke the weed, you get to learn the lingo, you get to watch the swag. Somehow, sudden now you've been acclimated in. You are now we giving out honorary blackness now, right? You honorary being black, and that's what a lot of y'all do when y'all having these affiliations and associations. You start giving them some of the most inner things that about you, and then they think they understand it and got it down, and now all of a sudden now they say they being you, right? I think there was a movie that Mike Tyson was called Black and White or White and Black. Remember that? And them white kids were coming down into the neighborhood. They was out there, buying all the drugs, sitting around, smoking and that. And then one of them came from an affluent white family. Probably, hey, what the hell you down there in the ghetto fucking around down there? Now look, you're going to get yourself in trouble. You better realize you're white. Oh, Dad, you guys are, it's fun down there. See, it's fun, right? Our life ain't about no fun. This is survival for us. You come there for fun. And so what happened was when shit got real, then he went back to being a white boy, right? I don't know if somebody y'all seen it. I've never seen that White Black or Black White with Mike Tyson was when he smacked the shit out of, I think, Robert Downey Jr. or some shit like that, right? But here he is saying selling crack and hard drugs to our communities, tying in theyself with us. See, it can never be solely about we as BADOS. It's always got to be inclusive. Everybody all of a sudden now is equivalent to the same shit that we gone through. See, you want to be, like you say, well, you can't be the victim when we're victims too. You got everything good, and then you want to be the victim at the same damn time. Huh? Schizophrenia. Sickness, right? So he said having your house raided is part of those choices. I hope people can understand the intent behind my tweet. Now, again, you're trying to say, but again, that's all assumption. You can't substantiate none of that. That is just the propaganda that's been given, and you taking it and you ran with it. Substantiate what you say about that. Show the facts to that. You won't be able to because they haven't had no proceedings and nobody's being charged and none of that. So where are you getting your information from? See? And so the community had a right to come at you. They had a right to say, you know what I'm saying? But you felt like, no, you was just going to keep going on. So again, I don't know if any of y'all had seen the conversation between this Lucas cat and, what's the brother name from the Nation of Islam? It'll come to me because he had the conversation. I sit and watch that, and he was trying to show him, but he was trying to talk too damn much and not trying to listen, thinking he gonna quick, fast talk. not understanding because he didn't understand us. I guess you don't understand, you not us. And that's the whole thing. A lot of people really don't understand us. You think because you may have lived in the communities, you even may have been able to go to and fro people's houses and got to know the family members, but it's still something different from an internal, from the blood. This ain't a costume that you can put on and take off. And that's how people act. They act as if like that's what it is. Oh man, I could be black. That ain't how it go. And so they were talking about some rising artist named Jack Harlow. He was a rapper out of Louisville, Kentucky. And he comes out of the city where Taylor was killed. Supposedly have a Billboard #2 on the 100 charts. What's poppin'? And which says J.W. Lucas claimed production credits in his Twitter bio, right? So what does that have to do with that? But then what we see later on is we see that the artist came out and wrote that he never met or spoken to J.W. Lucas person, right? But yet he had put that on his bio, so he's trying to get some cred. See, that's why he's talking about comparative, cooperative ventures. He trying to talk all this shit to try to like bedazzle you, talking about like money. Nigga, we ain't talking about no goddamn money. We talking about our life. We're talking about we is who we are and our essence and spirits of who we are. Ain't about that shit, nigga. We can cut all that shit away and walk the fuck away. Then you got to go back and be who you is, right? But see, that's what happens when you allow people to get in there and you don't set the parameters of the boundaries of where they can go in their conversations and what they can say and what they can't do. Didn't we just see just a couple weeks ago where people who of the, Jewish people or feeling like people were infringing on their, boundaries by saying certain things, and look how they came out? Well, that's the same thing that just happened here. You went beyond the boundaries of what you could say, right? Then he came out with this so-called forget letter, right? He said, I feel terrible about what I said regarding Breonna Taylor's case. The timing and nature in general were unsensitive to Breonna, her family, and a lot of people fighting for her justice. I also want to apologize for involving myself too aggressively in issues that black people are facing. I've let my passion and interest for being involved in change lead me to say things that I regret. My wording that her house was used as a trap house, speaking on potential consequences of her involvement, speaking on her case in general at the time. To all those I offended, I am sincerely apologetic, and I'm going to humble myself. I realize that I was out of line. I love you all, and I pray we can unify together. Now, again, some of y'all can take it for what y'all want to take that for, right? Each and every one of us is an individual. We all feel different ways. Some of us short wit, some of us stone heart, some of us ain't gonna never be forgiven, right? And so to each one, I'm not here to tell nobody nothing. I'm just gonna tell you what they said, right? And so that's what that is, right? He says sometimes pure intent can be the path to hell. One thing I'm not going to let people say is that I'm a racist. I fight for black people every day of my life. My comments were designed to ask if the case is being politicized for political propaganda purposes. And I was wrong to speak on it. What do you mean being politicized for political propaganda? That the world is fighting for her justice. How do you say that that case is being politicized for political propaganda purposes? Who politicizing it? BADOS is the people who are demanding justice? Because the other side is not using it. You're not seeing anybody who's running on talking about doing it. You're seeing a couple NBA players and things like that. But who's really, who politicizing this? Political propaganda. Who's doing it, right? What are you talking about? So now he's going to think twice before speaking moving forward. I will atone for my mistake. I'm sorry for the ignorant timing and tone of my tweet. That again came out again, right? Comes out again, saying it again. So it's like, okay, teach his own. But there's a problem here. This is, it's not just him. There's many of them that are coming out doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Act as if like they entitled to something, right? So this is going to come to the crux of what I want to talk about here. Now, what I want to show y'all here is this. Since everybody seems like they know our situation and then they kind of come dumbfounded like, oh, I didn't know that I was invading. I just looked at it from my white perspective and I thought that was going to be, sufficient enough. All right, so let me show y'all this, right? Okay, let me show you something. Let's go on a little history right quick. You see on your screen there, freed slaves battle smallpox and other diseases, right? Due to the simple fact that we are dealing with the COVID-19, the resurgence of it, there's been some speculations as to some claims of a cure. And for many of us as being Black American descendants of slaves, they say if you don't know history, history is doomed to repeat itself. History is best rewarded for those who acquire that research. So I want to show how sometimes there's the cyclic, is that a word, cyclic? The cycle as certain things are repeated. You have to ask yourself, if you see something that happened at a particular time once in history and for it to happen again, is it a coincidence? Now, we're not over here to talk about conspiracy, but we have to say if certain patterns show when certain situations arises, then we must say maybe this was part of somebody's plan. So as the show is talking about, the code, right? This code that it's the Negro problem. So this country has always had a Negro problem and never knew what to do with it. And what I'm about to display to you here is story and backdrop and show how it ties in with us today. So accordingly, the story talks about, it was an ancestor, name was Julia Wilbur. Around 1862, around Christmas Eve, they said she was a freedman's aid worker in Washington, D.C. And what she did is she was riding back home to her family, who were back in upstate New York. And what she described in her letter is the fact that there were smallpox ambulances were being seen in every part of the city. Now let's think about that too. When all this broke in 2020, starting after particular being declared on March 13th. And for many of us in the communities that we live in, we were constantly hearing the ambulance sirens. We were seeing the depictions of the hospitals and the constant broadcast of what was being play by play to us. Now here we're going back to 1862, and let's see if there's some similarities of what they're talking about. So again, she was talking about how this was all around them. And so she said that they had a 19th regiment, I guess that was some kind of military, who were encamped just out west of them. And she overheard in a conversation an officer told to maybe one of either a doctor or employee or something that where she worked at. And he said about last night, at that particular time they were talking, they said about 90 men had been or came down with what they called at the time black measles, right? There go again that term, black measles. Black always representation something of something negative, something bad. And so she understood that when they start having this conversation talking about black measles, that is very likely was about smallpox. So there was a report that talked about in 1863 that back to Rochester, New York, the Lady Anti-Slavery Society, where again she wrote, and she was talking about how in the winter and spring the smallpox had made dreadful rages or ravages among the freed people. Now again, think about this. The smallpox made dreadful ravages among the freed people. Now, those who are avid watchers of my show, and I did the show talking about how did the coronavirus get in the hood? How did black people attain it? And I gave you all the articles and what they were talking about. And we had to ask ourselves, well, how did it get in our hood, right? And so even at this particular time in 1862, now there's a correlation I'm going to talk about with this 1862 is because 1862 is setting up something that is kind of like the beginning of coming out of one scenario leading into a new scenario. And we'll get there as I talk about it. And we see even at this time, there was no measures were taken at first to prevent it, right? So there was nothing done, even though the reports were coming out, people were being contagious, and it was spreading all over the cities. But in a particular place, it seemed to be ravaging and having more than anywhere else. And the name of that place is called the contraband camps. Now keep that in mind. The contraband camps. Now, according after when she was writing that, she said about 700 people had died of the disease. So just imagine at that particular time, 700 people demise from, even they're going to talk about that there was already somewhat of a cure, right? There was a remedy back then, right? But I'll talk about that as I get more and give you more details as to what I'm talking about here. Now, there was a BADOS soldier who was in New Bern, North Carolina. His name was John Williams. And he had a letter that he had wrote back in 1864 talking to a Union officer. He's doing this. He was given an outline of how the disparity in the treatment of how white were getting treated and how black victims were not getting treated. See, this is 1864, right? So the same thing that is the fight of today are the same fights that was happening this particular time. And the significant part here is there's a transition in happening. Okay, there's a transition that's happening here. And his concern was that for his own, for his BADOS, he was seeing their conditions, he was seeing the maltreatment, he was seeing the neglect, and he was writing to his Union officer thinking that somehow, is there something that can be done to give my people some protection? And so he was talking about also how when our people, the BADOS, our ancestors were coming down with the smallpox, and then they would take them and drag them across the river. They didn't have no medical attendance for them. And even those who had somewhat recovered fighting this, they didn't have any rations to eat, to maintain, to get stronger. You know, think about that. You were already fighting a disease, but then you also need nourishment to rebuild your strength. So you had that for whites, but when it came to us, you didn't have none. And so he goes and he reports more and talks about how when they died, what they did is that they dug big holes and put them in without any coffins. Kind of like what we've seen again. If you haven't watched the show here, I showed you how they went again in where? New York. Took them on that island and they did those massive graves that they put bodies. At least we only seen coffins. We don't know what was inside of them.
Is a mass grave being dug for coronavirus victims at New York City's Potter's Field, where unclaimed bodies are laid to rest.
And they buried. Maybe this is some of our ancestors that was there prior, even though we're in 2020, but we're talking about 1862, right? And he believed this was some of the most horrible treatment and that there ought to be some persons that will look after them in a better manner. I see again, having this natural feeling for your own, not detaching yourself and saying, well, that's their issue, I'm okay. Because, you know, a lot of us have this individual mentality as to, as long as I'm good, if you didn't prepare yourself, that I, as the worker bee or the ant, has, you know, have my rainy day fun, as if like you think you can have your rainy day fun around other people who are out and think that somehow it's a safe environment, or you're not going to at least try, you know, to have some kind of compassion and help for other people. And so he related more about the distinction but how the whites and the coloreds, as they say, again, at this time we're being, you know, considered colored, right? You know, our name have always had consistently been changed. Negro, colored, you know, and all the same thing, right? And so he talks about when the whites are taken with the disease, they get taken care of. So he was pleading to this officer, well, why can't you do the same in return as what you do to yours? Why it's just equal across the board that these are people who are victims of a disease, but your care seems to be having a racial element to it. So we don't really know what really happened in the outcome of that. But we do know, according to what they talked about in the story, they say that smallpox, what they call the smallpox epidemic, the thing that they do know of this particular time that this is manifesting itself, that it was decimating the newly freed people. Let me say that again. The smallpox epidemic of that time, talking about in this 1862, right? Seem to have an affinity, seem to have some kind of correlation and connection as to these people who were in the process of being freed. Okay? Because I'm going to give you the backdrop to how we got to this point where they're talking about free. Okay? Just stay tuned for that. And so they talk about more about how the spread of this smallpox began in Washington in the winter of 1862. Now, it's funny that it's starting in Washington, D.C. in 1862, but I have to give you the backdrop later on and keep this point in mind. This is where it began, in Washington. And so it spread to the upper South by 1863 and 64. Went into the lower South and Mississippi Valley by 1865. Then eventually it seeped into the Western Territories by 1867 and 68, affecting even the Native Americans. So it seemed to have this liking, desire, a taste for certain people other than other people. But other people seem to somehow cured, or some kind of remedies were, and they didn't die in the decimating numbers of other people. Keep this in mind. Again, this is 1862.
It's about who is getting sick and who is dying. It's a racial disparity told by one man's experience. His name is Gary Harrell. He says he has lost 10 family members and friends to COVID-19. 10.
Hundreds of people, just numbers of people, any number of people associated with those people who are grieving that loss. And it's kind of hard you can't ignore it. It just seems like so much.
So this is, as I say, a new storyline emerging, and a very important one that they're dealing with the United States. The new data coming out that shows African Americans and people of color are dying in the pandemic, and it's just a disproportionate amount.
And so you have the Union troops were assembled in makeshift quarters. Now you got to remember, at this particular time, you're in the processes of setting up, which is going to be your Civil War. So you got your Union troops assembling, making makeshift quarters. And so what you're having is BADOS who are flooding into these settlements. What are called? Contraband camps. They're flooding into these contraband camps. Because why? The word had gone out that if you could get to these areas, if you can get here, you could get free. Now I know that Kanye West talked about Harriet Tubman and said some things, but the things that he talked about really does not give you the entirety, because I think he tried to say that Harriet Tubman didn't free the slaves. And a lot of people took offense to that, right? I'm not going to say that I'm going to co-sign, but I'm just going to give you the story, and you're going to make your own determination as to what really was taking place. And then you make your own conclusion. Okay. Now, what you got is you got a lot of our ancestors who are being free because they're leaving out of their, plantations, bondagement, and so forth. And they're getting and flooding themselves into these known camps called contra camps or contraband camps. Now, they talk about that the wealthy Washington, I think they call them the Washingtonians, I think that's the name. The Washingtonians, they were being vaccinated 2 and 3 times to ward off being infected with this full-blown deadly virus. Now, see, they had that for them, but they didn't have it for you. Now, we're talking about at this particular time, right? We're talking about at this particular time. And so a lot of our ancestors, according to what they write, now how true this is, I don't know, or they trying to make us seem like we were doing something idiotic or to make fun of. A lot of times you have to kind of, when you look at a lot of this stuff that they're talking about, sometimes you have to say they be trying to make fun or trying to make us look imbecile. They said that they were putting on their bodies tar to ward off possible infection. So somewhere there was some knowledge amongst our people that putting tar on their bodies would ward off the infection. And so to give you a vision of what it was like for them at this particular time, it was saying that those metropolitan police, they were requesting that the armies remove the bodies of our ancestors who had died of the smallpox. They were left on the city streets. Imagine that. Now, there's a part of the story you haven't got yet, but I'm going to go here first and then give you the backdrop, and you can put them 2 and 2 together, or 1 and 1 together. And so what they would do to signify that those were out there to warn, as they say, travelers and passerbys to avoid these areas, they would put a yellow flag that hung throughout the city to signal the presence of the deadly scourge, as they say, right? So we end up seeing is that the military officials, what they start to do is to order our ancestors to recross back into the Potomac to live in prisons. Now, again, our ancestors had nowhere to go. The contraband camps that were being overpopulated. And then we're having these so-called smallpox with no kind of protection because there's nowhere for you to go because you're already fleeing as a person who was in bondage, right? So they were saying, well, this is a way that we can resolve this is to have them go back across the Potomac, live in prisons, and go back to some of the former slave pens back in Alexandria and Fortress Monroe. See? We've been going through this a long time. There's a lot of people who try to act as if what you see today, like you brand new little white folks, brand new black folks. How do you correlate this to today? Oh, that was way back then. It's not today. And so those who couldn't even make it back to these prisons and these slave pens were left on their own. They talked about a snowstorm had struck the city. Rain and icy cold temperatures. Guess what our ancestors had to do? Here you is, have been forced to find shelter on frozen and muddy streets. You got no place to go in clothes or indoors. You're out on the street. And so what happened is a story that many people probably have never heard or been told is that many of our ancestors congregated and made tents in the center of Washington, D.C. Now, accordingly, they said that this smallpox virus that the local government doctors had been battling since the 18th century. Now, the thing is, this broke out among who? The emancipated slaves. I want you to keep that in mind. That when this broke again, it seemed to have broke out on the emancipated slaves, which is our ancestors. And so again, they go into talking about blaming the federal officials that didn't follow the protocols and procedures of vaccination and quarantine. Sounds like you're trying to talk about like today, right? Sounds like today, does it not? And so they say that the doctors and the communities had implemented for decades. So they had a regiment that they were doing. That's what they were doing to white folks. But when it came to black folks, it was something entirely different. Because why? You are newly emancipated free slaves, the Negro problem. A lot of them had regarded that the outbreak that was happening amongst free people, remember we got a D on ours, right? We don't have free, we freed, right? Signifying something, right? And so they said this was a natural outcome of emancipation, that somehow us trying to be free, this scourge, as they say, was put upon us because why? You're trying to be free. Keep this in mind. And so what they kept doing is they kept reinforcing these theories that newly freed black people were on the verge of extinction. Those who know. Those who don't, you're going to figure it out. And so based on this, they talk about that from the point of view of the officials, there was little incentive to try to stop its spread. Well, you can have the president of the United States tell you something, right? And you can have somebody tell you something, but then it's kind of like they saying back then that the officials didn't have little incentives to try to stop the spread amongst you. So they don't want you to actually be cured. They wanted to ravage and discourage, get rid of you because you are the Negro problem. And so what they did is they propagated a medical fiction that smallpox was a disease limited to who? Only former slaves. Let me say that again. They propagated a medical fiction that smallpox was a disease limited only to former slaves. Does that sound familiar? Black people dying. Black people killed. Black people dying more than anybody else. Was that not what you was hearing and putting the fear in you? Were they not propagating that to you? Well, guess what you got in common with your ancestors? They went through it too. Then, despite all the advances that they claimed that they had in the 19th century medicine, that really just underscores the environmental factors as causes the virus transmission. So again, as we heard too, when they started to try to say the common element factor, the reason why Black Americans are contracting it is because of what? Your condition, your environment. Same thing they said about your ancestors. It was the same thing. And so, story was talking about the Medical Society of Washington, that building barracks to house our former slave ancestors. They said this could have been the prevention that could have actually prevented the whole outbreak. You emancipated them and you left them out with nowhere to go. And here's people still to this day who talking about what we have and what we got generationally. Those who might be white that are coming from those who had been here as long as we've been here, not as long, but been around from that particular time, when they had the Homestead Act 1 and 2. And there's other people that one day I will talk about. When we were leaving these plantations, there was other people coming from Germany and Russia who were coming in to fill in the agriculture. They ain't gonna never tell you that. They're not gonna tell you that. So here it was, all they had to do was give you some shelter. But now they left you to be congregated together under those conditions that would breed more and would cause ravage and scourge and death. So, according that they published in 1864, military officials were not building barracks for free people on the outskirts of town or in the city's vacant lots. So what you did is forcing them instead to congregate in overcrowded camps in the center of town. The conditions were filled with trash, excrements, rotten food. And so the smallpox is one of the diseases due to domiciliaries. Right? Domiciliary circumstances. And is at all times a preventable disease. But in this case today, this one came out of nowhere. This one came supposedly as people who came from a certain particular place, who came around. We don't know how they got most around us, but somehow it infected us more than anybody else. And they tell us the story how it got here, but we really don't know. There's possibilities it came from Wuhan. There's possibilities it came out of the what is those places that had closed down. Skips mine out. It'll come back to my head though, right? And so over and over again by eminent authorities that there need not be a single case of smallpox in the city. If the authorities would have took the proper steps to check it. Right? Now again, that could be propaganda too. See, somebody looking and say, hey, that's kind of like something today. You could, again, see if you guys don't take the vaccines and stuff, it'd be kind of like what your ancestors did. Well, there's a reason why our ancestors probably wasn't willing to take those vaccinations, because even in 1862, that is long before there's going to be the Tuskegee experiment, right? Right? But them being on and coming out of the legal sense of the Southern slavery, they knew already what type of people and what y'all were doing and didn't trust you. So if there was any kind of vaccination, you think they were going to take it from you? So again, they want to put it as politically and talk about how Washington was too late to do anything, and it caused a lot of what took place amongst our people. And so the efforts of, they said, the Freedmen Bureau to establish newly freed people as workers were spurring massive migrations across the South. I thought they told us the only time that we did a massive migration is when we were leaving from the South from the 40s. We're talking about here. Word got out that the Freedmen Bureau were hiring, again, I won't say hiring. They were establishing newly freed people as workers. Now, I'm not sure whether they was giving them payments or not. And so because they could get somewhere to work, which means you probably could get something to eat and you probably could get some shelter. So massive migrations came across the South. Word spread. And we were coming. And so they said by 1964, this virus now started cropping up through the South. And so they talk about the Freedmen Bureau and then how the parishes where vaccination is not the custom. Colored children are poorly fed, much exposed. They sick and die and are buried without a record of their numbers. They don't even know how many that had took place. So you can see a child healthy in the morning, and by the evening, you hear of his death. So that's instant, right? I mean, really? I mean, is that really smallpox, or is that something else? That somebody could be healthy one minute and dead the next. That's instantaneous. That's not something that's going through a process. Again, they tell us smallpox, but really, was it smallpox? So they talk about the autumn of 1865, they said that it reached Washington, North Carolina, infected well over 300 free people in 1 week. Yeah, it seems like it has an appetite for free people. And it got down to killing roughly 800 free people a week in November. Remember the numbers they kept telling us, and people were dying? Black people die, black people, 75% black people die, black people, right? And so what they did is the Bureau of Physicians began to report the increasing cases of smallpox. Again, sounds familiar. Doctors keep saying, oh, they got coronavirus. They died from coronavirus. Dying from coronavirus. But these physicians work for the Bureau worked for the government. So again, could have been whatever it was, because again, we have to say that if they talk about a child can be healthy in the morning and dead at night, does corona kill that fast? Did smallpox kill that fast? And if it killed that fast, a lot more people should have died. How did so many people survive? Because we are here to this present day because they survived. So again, they're talking about how the smallpox had his parents at several posts, one in the hospital, and every precaution was taken to prevent it from spreading. So they tried to deal with it the best way they could. It was so bad to the fact that Story talked about that again, here it was, those who were under these conditions, under these environments, but they didn't have no food, no clothes, no shelter, nothing. So Story talks about two of our ancestors tracked 22 miles. We're not talking about today we could get an Uber, jump on the train, get on the bus. 22 miles one way, 22 miles back. That's 44 miles, right? And then tracking through what they say was cold weather, combined with the outbreak of smallpox in the state capital. And so here's the Bureau who was sent there to actually be a refuge for you, but supplies and everything was already depleted. So these ancestors trekked all the way looking for something, got to a place, empty barrels of boxes and nothing of real service to offer. The ancestors cried. But here's people who look at us and then they say, well, do you support Black Lives Matter? Oh, it's the trend right now. Oh, it's the thing we do. For you, it's something that a trend, it's something that you can support. We are the blood, spirit, and the living embodiment of all that you read. So end up after a period of time now that we done dealt with this, that the numbers of 135 cases a week went down to about 40 cases. So they talked about of that particular time, and the numbers that they say can never be actual, but it gives you some kind of understanding of the time. And so what I want to do here now is go and give you how they got in that condition and how that initiated. So I gave you the cart before the horse. Now I got to give you the horse so that you can put the two in its right proper place to understand. So check this out. Listen to this. Hold on. All right, so now this is going to be the other part to give you the entirety of the scenario of why I am using this as a talking point. Now remember, the title of the show is about the Negro problem, right? And so this story goes back to about 1861. starts off with about, particularly as they talk about the history, they talk about three ancestors in particularly, who would be the catalyst for why there was a mass movement because of our ancestors hearing about this story. And we find out how, as I was talking earlier, and I didn't go into depth with it, about when Kanye West talks about Harriet Tubman and how Harriet Tubman is accredited with freeing ancestors and taking them and going north. What I want you to understand is it's not that she didn't free the slaves or she didn't free, whether it be her family members and those who were willing to take the risk, but this was not the only movement at that time. Let me say that again. This is not to discredit, but we have to ask ourselves, this particular part of what I'm talking about of history here is not known. I'm not saying that somebody who might hear me might know this, but somebody who might be hearing me who haven't heard, and then put these pieces together, and then you'll know what was really taking place. So again, it's not to discredit anybody, but there were other scenarios and situations that was happening en masse in this whole land, especially particularly when we're talking about in the South, because of what was taking place. Now, a part of this is also for the simple fact that you have in 1857 is you're going to have the Dred Scott case, where Dred Scott tries to go before the court to be deemed a free and citizen based on, according to what they say, but they struck it down. So this is 1857. So we're going to say 4 years later, after the Dred Scott case, a scenario was taking place. So again, the setting of this is going to take in 1861. I'm going to give you the names of the three ancestors who, based on the story that they talk about, will be the catalyst. We're making why so much of a mass movement took place in this flight that they're taking, which will create the place that I was telling you when talking about the smallpox and how they who came in mass came based on what was taking place, and the places that they created were called the contraband camps. And the terminology that they used for the contraband camps, they labeled our people refugees. Now, those who remember about what took place in Louisiana, and let me show you that they used the term during the Katrina hurricane and what took place and the labeling. And we have to ask ourselves, why would you label somebody a refugee? And these were supposedly considered citizens in this country, right? So when we look at refugee, right, a refugee is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. Now, we understand natural disaster, right? But why label a person a refugee? Now, we understand as a displaced person, right? We can see some people who are running away due to, again, as you say, natural disaster. But a lot of times, words are used as, especially when it comes to we as BADOS, to discredit us, to ostracize us, to put us outside of the loop, right? To denigrate us, and so forth. And so when they use that term, we can go back because there was a history when you think about that, right? And when you talk about refugees when it comes to the United States, you know, the United States runs the world's largest refugee resettlement program. They welcome more Syrian refugees Again, Europe struggles to absorb and hold the flows of asylum seekers that migrate into Syria, Iraq, and Eritrea and elsewhere. But as of October 2015, it was the United States had resettled approximately 2,000 Syrian refugees since the start of the civil war. I'm going to say that again, in Syria in 2011, right? So in 2015, the United States had resettled approximately 2,000 Syrian refugees, right? Now, these responding was the call by the Obama administration, and it announced its intention to raise the annual ceiling of the United States refugee admission to 85,000 for the fiscal year that began in October 1st of 2015. They raised it from that to 100,000 the following year and up to 70,000 for the fiscal year that ended in September 30th of 2015, right? So basically, the United States is a place where people come, right, fleeing based on conditions and so forth. So again, I'm not here to be divisive. I'm only here to tell those who hear me and understand where I'm coming from that imagine in a country where you have massive immigration, massive refugees, and everything else, right? But you, as the people who are the founders, the builders, still fighting, and you're also fighting this element too, right? Now, who is considered a refugee in the United States? Now, according to what they say under the United States law, a refugee is someone who is located outside of the United States, right? So keep this in mind as I'm going to show you about what happened with the Katrina situation and what they deemed and called.
Week, New Orleans and the Gulf Coast were struck by one of the most devastating and costly disasters in U.S. history.
Yeah, shortly after the storm, the city of Colorado Springs welcomed thousands of Katrina refugees, and many still live here. As KRDO News Channel 13's Dana Clemens shows us, these refugees are bringing a new flavor to southern Colorado.
Chef Beebe's restaurant is a sizzling success.
And then the red sauce is the etouffee sauce.
But when he first got to the Springs, he had no idea what he would do.
It was a journey that our family was not prepared to take, but we didn't have much choice.
That's because Hurricane Katrina forced his family to evacuate suddenly.
I remember specifically telling my son Alexander, who was 6 years old at the time, when he asked, when we were loading up the van to move, where we were going. And all I could muster was to tell him we were going on an adventure, because we had no idea where we were going to live. We had no idea where we were going to work. All we had was the clothes on our back and everything we could get out of our home.
Even though Hurricane Katrina was a tragedy, Chef Beebe says it taught him an important lesson of rebuilding.
Not only rebuild our homes, but to rebuild our lives in the ways that we want them to be.
Without any actual cooking experience, except for what he learned from his Mama Pearl,
And of course, cheese, which makes everything taste better.
he decided to take a leap.
Shrimp, oh boy. Ready to go.
And it's one that's gained him a loyal following.
Very good.
Not just happy customers, but staff too.
It's awesome to be able to come in and know that you're working in this family-owned, family-run business, and it's great.
Making the Springs truly feel like home.
We get to have gumbo every day. What's wrong with that?
In Colorado Springs, Dana Clemens, KRDO News Channel 13.
Gumbo every day, we like that.
Yeah.
Chef Beebe's restaurant is in its third year of operation.
It's already been voted one of the best of Colorado Springs by readers of 2 local newspapers.
From the Astrodome to tell us what's going on there. Alicia.
Hi, Bobby. You said it exactly right. A lot of frustration, and a lot of it stems from the confusion over what a lot of the evacuees have been told is going to happen with regard to their federal assistance coming in. And I have a gentleman standing here with me who helps illustrate that picture. He's chosen not to give his name. He's from New Orleans, and he only says he is for the people. So if you can explain to me, what has happened with your debit cards? You're having a lot of problems, right?
Well, for one thing, they're not activating. They're giving us these cards, and they're not activating these cards, and they're giving us a runaround. And then when we call, to find out if the card is activated, they're giving us a runaround, and they send us back to Red Cross, and we go to Red Cross. Nobody knows anything. I mean, come on now, excuse my French, But anyway, we out here, we stranded. We don't have any goddamn thing. Nobody's not trying to help us. FEMA is a fake and a fraud. Red Cross is a fake and a fraud. where do we go from there? I mean, who should we depend on? If we can't depend on our own federal government, who can we depend on?
The FEMA cards were supposed to be $2,000 a piece, but you received a FEMA card.
$700, and they cut my card off.
And when you asked them why that was, what were you told?
They don't know. Nobody knows.
Okay, thank you very much. I do not know.
Okay,
no.
Find out for me. You tell me.
Thank you. And actually, Bob, one thing I can tell you, we talk about this confusion, and there are quite a few reporters who have been kind of confused during those news conferences, and we actually have direct access to a lot of these officials. The FEMA, in all fairness, has said there are going to be glitches. They understand that there are problems. They have said that everyone is going to get assistance that qualifies. However, they're still working it out. They keep reiterating to us that this is a work in progress. Back to you.
Alicia, is that gentleman still there?
He's still here.
Could you ask him what he wants? What is he looking for?
Sure. Hold on one second. The anchor in New York would like to know, his name is Bob, he would like to know what it is that you would like to happen. What do you want?
What I would like to happen, I would like for him to give us at least $20,000 a piece so we can, get our life together. We didn't ask to come on that bus slave. It's like a slave ship. Just like, back in history, they put us on a slave ship. They separated us from our family. They did it, just modern day slavery, Just give us what the fuck we deserve.
Oh, whoa. Hold on. That's enough. I mean, you've made your point, sir. We thank you very much for being with us. But Alicia, we know there's frustration there, and a lot of these folks have gone through so much, and we don't want to minimize or trivialize that, but we still have a certain responsibility here in what we're doing as far as broadcasting.
With the breach of 3 levees protecting New Orleans, the landscape of the city has changed dramatically, tragically, and perhaps irreversibly. There is now over 25 feet of water where there was once city streets and thriving neighborhoods.
I hate the way they portray us in the media. If you see a black family, it says they're looting. See a white family, it says they're looking for food. And it's been 5 days because most of the people are black. And even for me to complain about, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've even been shopping before even giving a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give, and just to imagine if I was down there, and those are my people down there. So anybody out there that wants to do anything that we can help with the setup, the way America is set up to help the poor, the black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of the people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us.
And subtle, but in even many ways more profoundly devastating, is the lasting damage to the survivors' will to rebuild and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
One is not going to be called, well, it's deemed that, but it don't state that. But the other person who they're going to talk about, that person is going to be, again, the differentiator between one and the other. And look at how life restart for this one. And the other one here is like, okay, I'm kind of like, again, as we talk about this story here about 1861, I'm displaced with nowhere to go. I'm frustrated. You show the active like you're trying to do some mercy and help, but in actuality, he tells you, hey man, it's all a fraud and it's all a fraud game. And so they say also that, is of a special humanitarian concern to the United States. Demonstrates that they were persecuted or fear persecution due to race, religion, nationality, political oppression, membership in a particular social group. Now that's what they considered a refugee. So how do people who've been here since enslaving us, right? Enslaving, and go through the process of being, as I'm about to talk about, what happens in 1861, and then being put in a status that we've been fighting this whole time. Okay? So I want to keep that in mind. Because when I said earlier about black folks being in this country the greatest people to do a sacrifice for the betterment of other people who do not appreciate nor give us acknowledgement, all I have to tell you is, have you ever heard the term of remittance, right? You know what remittance is, right? Remittance is kind of like a holiday where those who from other nations put their money, send money back to the country to take care of their families and people of their other countries. Now, without the contribution that our ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears have created, remittance wouldn't even be possible. So when we seen that young brother there, that Jonathan, what was that brother's name? Is it Jonathan, what was his name? Oh, Jonathan Isaac, and what he said. And again, we don't cajole or congratulate or high five what took place, but those who have the insight and spirit to know what really took place is because, again, as I'm telling you, what our ancestors went and endured for you to be able to come here to create a lifeline for you when they have not even established for themselves. And then people who come here do not assimilate to the original. Let's say I've seen where somebody said the original dreamers, right? Would be our people, would be you saying you're the dreamers, but we are the original dreamers, and you're getting proceedings over us. So I think it's incumbent that it's people like myself and others who see this, we must yell this at the top. We must make this a valid conversation that you must hear, whether you agree with it or not. The facts is always going to be what they are. And if you're upset, you have to ask yourself, why are you upset? Okay? So let me give you a little history as to who we are as the people that have contributed and gave the greatest sacrifice that any place on the country, but everybody acts as if like you don't owe us anything. You act as if like your God-given gift was to come here and that our condition is only because we put ourselves in that position. Well, I'm here to tell you that is not the truth. Okay? So a lot of y'all act as if y'all brand new and you don't know. So the three names that are associated with took place as into the massive movement that ended up becoming those contraband camps, they say one was named Shepard Mallory, Frank Barker, and James Townsend. Now, accordingly, they were put to work building Confederate fortifications near, they say, Hampton, Virginia homes shortly after the outbreak of the Civil War. Okay. And according, they had got word was that they learned that their owners, the Confederate Colonel Charles Mallory, was planning to move them further south to labor in the Confederate Army, separating them from their families. Now, here again, the stigmatization about BADOS, men who don't really love their families, who really should detach themselves from their children. Is it due to circumstances, or is it due to the simple fact that they just don't have love? Now, everybody will have their reason and talk points, and many people who use that as a talking point to try to say that it's always about black and you're always trying to blame somebody else. Well, I beg to differ on that. And so what we see there, Shepard Mallory, Frank Barker, and James Townsend, what they did is that on hearing that they was going to be separated from their families, so to avoid all that, they ran to a nearby Fort Monroe. And this was an Army installation in Southeast Virginia that had remained in the hands of the U.S. Army. Okay? So they did is they ran to this encampment, and this, according to this territory, was under the U.S. Army. And it was in April 17 of 1861 when Virginia had seceded from the Union. Okay? Now, this Colonel Mallory, the individuals who the three had ran from, right? He sought after them, went to the U.S. Army, demanded that the men be returned to him, right? According to as the law of the Federal Fugitive Slave Act, they were supposed to comply to that. Okay, so it was I think his name was General Benjamin Butler, right? This was the officer in command at Fort Monroe. He refused to return Shepard Mallory, Frank Barker, and James Townsend. And because Colonel Mallory had used the men to build fortifications to aid a force engaged in armed rebellion against the United States, right? So he was actually as an op towards the United States. And based on that, and it says that according to the rules of war, it permitted that this General Benjamin Butler could confiscate the 3 slaves as contraband property, okay? So he used a provision in the law to allow them to be able to stay with him and be able to confiscate and wouldn't be breaking the law. And so accordingly, they said this is how he capitalized on the slaveholders' insistence that slaves were property. Now again, is this where the term "we being deemed property" originate from? Or was that because, again, they say chattel slavery and so forth? But it was, I want you to remember this because, see, this part here, when they used property, it was used as a mechanism for releasing the 3 from the owners of their grass. So they used property, us as property, so that it can be used in the rules of war to allow Shepard Mallory, Frank Barker, and James Townsend to remain in their regiment. And so it was this act that Frank Barker, Shepard Mallory, and James Townsend, and then you had General Benjamin Butler. This is the precedence. This is the beginning of what ended up happening. So what happened is word got around. Bond people were fleeing from all over, from slaveholders in peacetime, even as in wartime. Now again, the risk of being caught was high. The number of successful escapees were low. And based on the Fugitive Slave Act, runaways were returned to their owners. Okay? But many of the slaves that were emancipated in these conflicts afterwards were re-enslaved. Like if we go back to, like, say, the American Revolutionary War in 1812, you also had those that were the uprisings in the Caribbean and South America. You were good enough to be fighting in that war, but after that war was over, you go back to the plight we got you in. Okay? So now what you have is word is spread around what happened. And so you start having men, women, and children all fleeing to get to the Union Army lines, okay, at risk, fighting for freedom. Now you got to remember, the Underground Railroad is not constructed, as they say, to 1863, okay? This is 1861. What I'm showing you and telling you is, based on what was taking place, there was something that was already manifesting itself. Okay? And so what you see is because that word was getting out that the army was fighting against slaveholders and offered the refugees access to the power that they could draw on to help to destroy their slavers, this became a motivating factor that created ambition for freedom. Imagine being in that position and then word is being traveled amongst the plantations that, hey, Union Army is fighting against Massa and them. And if we can get to them, we can actually be free if we get there, right? And that's what they heard. That's the way they took it. Now, again, what is being said to what they understood could be 2 different things. But because of that misunderstanding, it creates a dynamic. I want you to understand that. They're creating a dynamic. And so when a lot of them, when they reach these lines, right, it created an ad hoc settlement. And this ad hoc settlement ended up becoming what they call the contraband camps, right? And that's when they deemed it in May of 1861, okay? Now, because you got to remember is what the Union Army was trying to do was enlist soldiers that were going to fight. But that's not how the word went out. The word went out is if you could get there, you could be free. So people were getting their family members, rounding them up and taking their chances. Now, again, it does not take away from what Harriet Tubman was doing. But again, this was happening in masses because of what was being said. Okay? They're not teaching that because they don't want us to kind of know that, right? All right. So, accordingly, number of slaves who spent all part of the Civil War in contraband case or in the camps, they can't determine the actual, precise number because they say at the time they don't have the mechanisms. Well, you can always do a head count, right? But that was not really their concern because they were not trying to actually do that. They were only trying to get those who were willing to enlist in the military. But it breeded, I ain't gonna say breed, it created the frenzy because freedom, that's all you need to hear. We didn't hear enlisting, we heard freedom. So again, the masses are coming. So you had the Freedmen, the Southern Society Project, and according, they had invested in decades in the transcriptions and analysts of primary sources related to the end of slavery. So according to those records, in these records would document either the numbers of people who, when you do your tree and then you start finding these Freedmen Bureau notes and stuff like that, then that's telling you that you have some of your family members that were part of that. A lot of us, when we do these tracing our trees and finding some of these documentations, you're seeing that Freedmen Bureau coming up. So they, according to them, what they say, they estimate about 474,000 African Americans, which is BADOS, labored for the Union in the contraband camps that were Union occupied portions of the Confederacy by the spring of 1865, right? Now, again, they say approximately between 12 to 15% of the U.S. slave population, according to the 1860 census. So you got 12 to 15% of the slave population is in these contraband camps. When they say, when you think substantially exceeds the number of what would consider been free blacks of that time, well, they said it was about 221,702. So it basically doubled that number from those who were coming off them plantations that end up going by these contraband camps. So again, we're talking about a same time when they're talking about when they say, well, Harriet Tubman. But no one's talking about this mass fleeing that was coming off them plantations. So we give only the credit to one. It's kind of like when you look at the story about, again, this isn't to discredit what took place when we talk about Rosa Parks, but wasn't there a sister before Rosa Parks? But don't give no acclimate, she's not being idolized for her stance because she didn't fit what be the, persona that they wanted to depict. Okay? So again, you have to ask yourself, when people do that, what is the reasoning for that, right? So otherwise, you're not giving the truth of the total of the story. And so what we see is that you got 203,000 of our ancestors were a part of the war under the auspice of the Union Army in Upper South locations, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, right? Georgia, South Carolina, even in Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana. We getting in there, huh? We getting in there. Because why? Why are we getting in there? Freedom. We're trying to get free. You know what I'm saying? People were getting on watercrafts, skiffs, rowboats, any way they could, get up to where them Union forces, when they besieged Vicksburg in Mississippi, here are people coming, right? They had stories about women who, went 200 miles, had to disguise herself as a man, fled all the way, got there, and died of exhaustion once she got there. See? These are the stories that we must know, because again, then when people talking out of the side of their neck, then we like, oh, okay, ain't that something? So now what you have is, when they talk about displacement, this is old as humanity, as they say. Now, what this created, because again, you had this dilemma here. You had those who would enlist, and then you had those who were just fleeing because of the ideal of being free. And they came in mass and with families and all that, right? So they said this specific status of the war, they call war refugees, right? A person fleeing persecution, war-related danger, entering at least a temporary condition of what? Statelessness. Keep that in mind. When our ancestors fled from those plantations and from them to those contraband camps and was in a, let's say, stagnant position, what ended up happening is it created them to be in a temporary condition, what they call de facto statelessness. And so at the time of the Civil War, the Union Army was the only institution with the size and infrastructure to reach all the contraband camps. Okay? Ain't that something, right? And so these armies exist to fight and win wars, but was not administered to be humanitarian aids. And so these camps are kind of like places that they were just refugees in, with no real status and no place. Because again, also de facto statelessness leaves you where no state is recognizing you. None of that. And so they talk about, in the antebellum slavery policy in the United States, added complications to this situation. Because you had the Republican Party espouse the freedom national principle, which maintained that freedom was the default national condition. Slavery merely a local abbreviation. And this was decades before the war. Federal government had operated on the opposite proposition, namely that the United States government had the duty to protect property rights of slaveholders without standing the local laws that prohibited slavery of regional opinions about the institution. They talk about how the Article 4 of the United States Constitution permitted slaveholders to reclaim runaway slaves. Legislation not only strengthened that right, but expanded the role of the federal government in enforcing it, especially the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The law required that free states, government, militia to participate as well. Okay? So they had it set up the way to get them to do, but this situation created something that's not what they really wanted. And so on August 6th of 1861, Congress had passed the first Confiscation Act. Now, this act, which stipulates that owners of slaves used to aid the Confederate military efforts were forfeit any claim to those slaves. Now, I'm going to say that again. August 6, 1861, Congress passed the first Confiscation Act. Okay? So they created a law that taking us away from them was considered confiscation. And in that, Act, it said it stipulated that the owners of slaves used to aid the Confederate military efforts would forfeit any claim to those slaves. Then they went back to the drawing board 2 days later after they done thought about that. And so the War Department sent instructions implementing that the new law to the Union's commanding officers, they should receive any slaves who ran to their lines and keep careful records so that after the war, courts full of legal professionals could determine which former slaves had actually fled from masters who were employing them militarily and which had not in later cases. Owners would be financially compensated, right, for loss of their property. No refugees from slavery should be sent back. Now, again, there's that word again, refugee, right? So neither should the Union Army entice slaves to flee their owners. So what they're saying here is this. When they created this Confiscation Act, that based on them had been part of the Confederate and end up coming on our side, they forfeit your claim on them, and that they were going to keep records as to who were enlisted as military and who were those that were just fleeing, and then they would pay them for that. Okay? They would pay them. And so, under this Confiscation Act, that those who they deemed as refugees from slavery, they said no refugee from slavery should be sent back. But how that ended up happening is because they were contemplating on this. And guess what? Those who came to enlist themselves in the military, one word was that they were going to send back the ones that they were classifying as refugees. They stood up for them. They got on code. They said, then we're not fighting, and they would hide them. And they did a lot of things, even possibly being court-martialed. But they stood on code with their people. They didn't individualize it and say, well, I'm doing it for just me. They understood the circumstances and understood taking them back would be, if not a death sentence, that, could you imagine free reign where nobody can't stop and a mug just, you couldn't even imagine that. And a lot of people who come here don't imagine what our people have gone through to allow you to be able to lifesaver to where you come from and come amongst us. And then you have a disdain towards us because you don't know who we are. Right? And so the result of the law and order were ambiguous. See, they were still trying to find a way to make this so that it was smooth sailing, because there's still some rough edges or some ways that I guess those who were new law was like, there's some holes in this world. So they had to go back and they tried to figure out. So what ended up happening is, let's say that they had to come with something that authority that would suppress or surpass the first Confiscation Act, because they felt like somewhere there was some holes in this. And so using martial law to free slaves in states where civil authority remained in effect, that's what they did. So they called the martial law into effect. What you would have is people who were under the authority of command who refused to bring, again, because you're going to have Lincoln is going to do Emancipation Proclamation, right? So you had people who were refusing to obey on this proclamation. And so to bring the line of this proclamation in line with the act, what you've seen is President Lincoln overturned it and moved primarily aimed at keeping Missouri in the Union and maintain a primacy of civil authority over military authority. That's right. So what you see is you have the Union General Henry Halleck. He tried to avoid the dilemma by issuing General Order Number 3, which barred escapees or escaped slaves from entering Union camps throughout the Department of Missouri. Other Union officers and many enlisted soldiers resisted and harbored fugitives anyway. As I said, you want to sit there and say you don't want to obey because of what it is, and we say, well, if you let them go back, do you know that is dangerous? That's death. So in 1862, Congress passed a law prohibiting the Army from returning fugitive slaves, banning slavery in U.S. territories, abolishing slavery in the District of Columbia. The Second Confiscation Act freed the slaves of any owners who were disloyal to the Union and endorsed the value of former slave labor in suppressing rebellion. The Militia Act especially authorized the use of black labor, right? Move interpreted as authorizing black enlistment. So this is how they figure out the dilemma, which is what we're going to do is those who we had deemed as refugees, what we're going to do is enlist them as workers and things of that would be working at the contraband camps. And that way we will have full authorization of the black labor in any capacity. Okay? Now, before the Emancipation Proclamation, men, women, and children who made it to the Union armies were no longer slaves. Okay? If you got there, you were now no longer a slave. Now, again, the Emancipation Proclamation, the first preliminary one was on September 22nd of 1862. Then the final one was on January 1st of 1863. Now, the one that was done in January 1st of 1863 reached to our ancestors that was in the rebelling states as of January 1st of 1863. Not yet recognized as citizens, our ancestors were first freed into a de facto statelessness. When you hear a lot of times, you hear people who teach under like the Moore Science Temple and things like that, and they talk about you not being your proper persona, that you calling yourself black American and so forth, that you are not under status. Well, this de facto statelessness is kind of like when you talk about Emancipation Proclamation, which is really just a ceremony, a declaration, because you got to remember that Congress is the one that's got to enact this and make it a law. So it never was a law. So basically it's really like a transferring from one to another. Now you're just transferring. And then they leave you in a state of limbo that, again, you done heard the term, there's no law that a white man is bound by black people. Because why? You've been put in a de facto statelessness, which means you have to find a way to get yourself back into status. You have to have an identity. The Negro problem is about identity. Wow. No one would say this. No one wants to talk about this. But the reason why all this talk and all this going around and talking about reparations and nobody really want to deal with it and talking about police reform and they still want to keep quantifying immunity is because of the status that was put on us. We have not come out of that, even though that they say that the 14th Amendment somehow puts us in a kind of a de facto status. But still we in a de facto statelessness status as well because of the identity that we hold. So as we've seen recently, and when we talk about the things that have fell out from the ethers of the spirit, well, one come out and says that, well, these people here might be the children of Israel, the Hebrew Israelites, and then how that all fell out, right? And then it's talking about, you've seen somebody doing the Goya beans and throwing the thumbs up and all. What is this all about? Is this about the reestablishment of a statelessness people who are trying to find the identity to call themselves so that they can be recognized by law? And then with that, everything else will fall in its place, would it not? And so it was in 1864 that Congress repealed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1865. Then Congress passed a resolution freeing the family members of all black soldiers. So first of all, they get the soldiers and the soldiers' black family, right? So they say the final blow to the legal slavery in the United States was the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which came on December 6th of 1865. So you had the War Department and Congress took additional steps to address the status of the bond people who made it into the Union lines, established the American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission, okay? Congress to send agents throughout the occupied South to investigate the conditions of the free people in Union protected the contraband camps. Okay? This is what they did. This is how it happened to us. Right? So the question becomes, after all that what I just put to you here, something happened in creating that emancipation. A situation that they didn't actually want, but the situation created itself. It's kind of like where we at right now. Right? When the George Floyd situation was like enough was enough and the people got out and did it. So now you're in a situation where we're trying to figure out a remedy how to deal with it. We done seen people, again, as those who watch average watchers of this show, how we talked about the United Nations, and then we see how that they try to take the case before the United Nations, and then we talked about the 55 nations in Africa signed a petition and saying, and then all of a sudden the United Nations just closed down, right? And then here they is talking about police reform and all this other stuff, and then saying, they bickering, going back and forth. Well, take the chokehold out, but everything else, right? And so, what is the real remedy here? Does it have anything to do with, as I just told you here, about what took place when they put you in this de facto statelessness? And once you understand what that de facto statelessness is, and then talk about law, does that redeem, put you in the status you need, and then everything else that you're seeking for, can it come to fruition? This is Mr. Blows Your Minds.